Hello, I'm Rob Price. This season, we're exploring Agentic AI from the perspectives of those driving its evolution. Welcome to Futurise.
Hello there. Yes, so my name is Simon.torrance. I'm a senior advisor to companies on strategy and innovation. And I set up a company recently called AI Risk. And that the company helps other organizations understand the risks of exploiting and deploying AI. And by risk, I mean holistically in terms of the strategic risk of not using it effectively, being outcompeted, the financial risk of making poor investments that deliver poor returns. And of course, there are loads of operational risks to do with cyber attacks, people not having the skills needed to take advantage of this technology. And then finally, the risk related to compliance and regulation. So the risk of not complying with standards, with regulations and laws.
So, Simon, it's great to have you on Futurise podcast today. And I think over the last couple of months, your voice has been one that I've seen mostly over LinkedIn and the internet talking about Agentic AI. Tell us a bit more about your take on Agentic AI.
Yeah, well, it's probably the most fascinating topic that I've come across recently. I've been working in technology for over 25 years now, and what agentic AI means to me is something quite profound. Essentially, AI agents, sort of, if you like, technology systems that have agency, um, means that potentially you can replicate the work that humans typically do by bodies, by AI agents that can do the work even better because they don't sleep, they don't have lunch breaks, they don't need to go home. They can undertake complex, increasingly complex tasks in an automated way with given set objectives and can collaborate with other AI agents as well as other humans and other systems and get so much more done for relatively low cost. So for me, what it means is if you think about organizations, they have a human workforce. Now we have the potential of adding a, let's call it non-human workforce, which is potentially infinite. So for an organization, when typically one of the barriers to growth is just being able, taking on more overhead, hiring more people, potentially that problem disappears because you can suddenly have 10 times the number of workers working on solving problems for the company, but those workers are not human workers. They are what some people call synthetic workers. And for knowledge intensive industries, and I think about 50% of industries we would class as knowledge intensive, that has very, very profound implications for the economics of these firms. And I've been working on the topic of business model transformation for 20 years now, and this feels like something that really flips the way of thinking about what an organization is and what it can do now. And I think we're just at the early, very, very early stages of even recognizing that, even though the technology exists today to do it.
So I think there are two obvious things that we're going to have to explore based on that answer. And I think that the first one, I mean, I know you're passionate about insurance and financial services industry as a whole. So I think we need to look at the potential impact of what you've just described on that industry. But clearly, there's going to be other people listening on the call who are now even more concerned, perhaps, than they were before listening, as to how do you calibrate the balance between a human workforce and an agentic workforce. But should we start with the insurance industry? So let's kind of move to how might senior executives in the insurance industry be looking at agentic today in the context of driving some of the transformational needs that they have.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll couch this in terms that apply to any knowledge intensive sector as well. So, of course, many big organizations have their first experience with, let's call it generative AI. So, predictive AI and machine learning has been around for a long time in insurance and financial services, undertaking predictive analytics. And that's really, really important to those industries. But with generative AI, we're able to take things to a new scale. Essentially, we are bringing levels of intelligence, greater levels of intelligence to create things rather than just predict things. And as we know, these systems are um, people call it stochastic or probabilistic rather than deterministic in terms of just a machine that creates output. So, in the insurance and financial services industry, most companies they've created some sort of internal GPT. They might have got a license to Microsoft Copilot, and they're starting to experiment and test different use cases. But they're relatively simple use cases, typically focused on optimizing processes which are routine and mundane. And it's quite basic, I would say, at the moment. What got me really excited was I found an example of a very small insurance company um, undertaking agentic AI in a way that I haven't seen anywhere in the world, and indeed not in any other sector. And this was where a whole operations department was replaced by robots, by AI agents. And I'll describe the story briefly. And it's an example about how there's a great phrase, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Because the case study I'll describe is one that has essentially does what we talked about at the beginning here, which creates a new team of synthetic workers, AI agents, that undertake diverse and complex knowledge work as a team. They collaborate over Slack, like humans do. There is a manager bot that keeps an eye on what they're doing and gives them the tasks. And then there's one human at the top who checks that things are being done ethically and so on. But that insurance company, for various reasons, had to replace its human staff, and they put in place this system which operated 10 times better than the human team. And it was a mix of actuaries or actuarial functions, underwriting functions, customer service functions, IT, etc. So it's the same mix of functions that the humans were doing, but it's just run entirely by bots using tools from last year. So not even off the shelf, low cost tools. And they outperformed the human team by a factor of 10. So insurance is all about loss ratios, and they managed to get those loss ratios, which equate into profitability, significantly better. And the reason for that is that they were given an objective and they worked towards that objective without any need for being constrained by old ways of thinking, without needs of sleep or whatever. And within a few months, they were achieving these incredible results. And of course, they cost a lot less than having a whole team of humans doing the same thing. Now, that example is right at the extreme edge of where not only the insurance or banking or other industries are. Most companies are playing around with co-pilots and things like that. This is the most extreme example. And when I tell people about it, the first reaction is, you've made it up. It's not true. It can't work. And what we're talking about here is essentially a someone who runs the company saying, I need to create an operations team that is better than that I've had before, and without any need for complex IT, to be able to establish that pretty quickly, and that team to run as if they were human. Now, there are lots of learnings around it, like putting some ethical guidelines, but essentially, that is what I've got most excited about. And I've started to tell people running much larger insurance companies or insurance brokers and banks and other companies about this. And when they realize what I'm talking about, they go, we need to understand more about this. Agentic AI is on our roadmap, but we haven't started it yet. And I think that's why it's so exciting what you're doing and that example, what I'm trying to do as well. It's not science fiction. The tools are there to do what I've just described at scale. And most people do not realize that that's possible today.
And I think I used to talk years ago around the difference between traditional businesses and those born in the web. Um, and then maybe I kind of evolved that to be digital. But there's almost a born in an agent world or an AI agent world. So a business that's setting up from scratch now will do things differently. I mean,
Mm,
we in a sense, it's if we had the challenger banks and the established banks uh, contrast, if you like, over the kind of recent years. What would it look like if somebody did that today and designed it from bottom up using agents?
mm,
Now, of course, at scale, it's not necessarily the case and not necessarily right, coming back to ethical decisions as to what should be done. But there are examples that illustrate what could be done. And
mm,
indeed, I'm sure I've worked with CFOs in the past whose ultimate goal was inevitably to kind of do lots of revenue with no people because that maximized the margin. So I get it in terms of market demand.
mm.
But how do we begin to think about the calibration of what's right?
Yeah.
So using that technology that is transformational, and I mean, you know, I truly believe it is utterly
Mm,
transformational, and we need absolutely transformational solutions at the moment to solve some of the problems that we've got across the world, let alone in a particular industry. But how do we begin to understand what the right balance is for organizations between agent teams and humans?
yeah, I think it's a really key question because, of course, public companies, their job, well, their stated job, why the people who run it are in place, is to increase returns to shareholders. So they are incentivized to do that, and everybody then is incentivized to do that. Now, if that is the primary objective, then as you say, the CFO, well, the organization will naturally want to be able to replace um, inefficient, costly resources with those that are much more efficient and less costly. And that's how businesses have been run forever. So that's one way of thinking about it. But of course, you could get significant rejection from the antibodies within an organization if you try and bring in sort of agentic teams to work alongside human teams, because the humans start to realize that more and more of their tasks could be taken away, which is probably increasingly the case. And the extreme example I talked about is one where that happened, but at a very small scale. So I think maybe one of the opportunities is to apply this approach to areas of new growth for an organization. And in the insurance industry, there is this notion of what people call the insurance protection gap. So the gap between how much insurance coverage humans and businesses need to be fully protected and what they currently have. And that gap in the insurance industry is extremely vast. Most people don't have enough cover for their the risks that they are open to, and in the insurance industry, that's worth about $6 trillion, that gap. And the industry itself is worth about $6 trillion. So this is things like access to healthcare in emerging markets, cyber defense in all markets, access to pensions for many people. So particularly in emerging markets where people have very, very little cover, um, part of the problem is that the industry is unable to deliver cost-effective solutions to them. So if I was in the insurance industry, what I might be saying is or thinking, why don't we tackle those issues with agentic AI? Because we're unable to deal with them today, but maybe agentic AI could do dramatically more powerful things to address that problem. That grows the value of the industry and is of immense social benefit as well. So that's one way where you could think, well, this is a win-win for everybody in terms of thinking about how to apply this. Now, however, of course, hard-nosed CFOs will say, well, Simon, your example in of that small company, maybe we could look at reorganizing the cost structure in this particular division. Or it could be we want to really disrupt this competitor because they're particularly dangerous to us, and we could use Agentic AI to really go after their business. So I think you've got this sort of there's maybe three buckets here. There's core business, optimizing that, which is probably, as you say, the most morally, ethically, dangerous, if you like. You've got go after new business against existing competitors, which probably most more people could feel better about. And then you've got the probably the more exciting thing is how could, whether an insurance company or we're a bank trying to provide banking services to the underbanked, or we're a healthcare company, or all kinds of organizations, how could we help people who are not getting the services they need by creating very, very cost efficient solutions to their problems? So I think maybe those are three buckets that we could consider this within.
And I think maybe there's some other patterns as well that some of the conversations I've seen, things like retiring expertise. So where you've got bodies of knowledge that are leaving the industry, which can happen at the same time in certain spaces, simply because you've had people who've worked there for 4 decades and built that knowledge. So a way of accelerating the onboarding of new knowledge and retaining that. So it's a sustainability of organization. But also one of the things that I've heard is roles or jobs that maybe people don't want to do anymore. So actually there are just natural challenges in terms of market to attract some of the people to do those. I guess the obvious thing with all of that is it's uncertain, isn't it? I mean, we're in this place where this is fundamentally transformational and new, and people and organizations will need to find their path. What are you seeing in terms of the obvious places to start for organizations? If you were in the conversations that you've been having, where would you, I mean, we talked there about starting in the new growth spaces, but what would they do? What's the first thing to do?
Well, I think the very first thing to do is to do a scan of the whole organization, all the tasks, all the jobs in all the functions. Which of those could be augmented or automated by advanced forms of AI, and to what degree? Now, most companies haven't done that, or they've done it in a sort of partial way with some consultants or maybe some internal efforts, but they haven't done it in a rigorous scientific way. And one of the things I say to my clients is use AI to do that task I've just described. And there are now AI tools that can do that in about 2 weeks. They suck up all the job descriptions within the company, press a button, and it gives you that quantification of the potential to augment, automate every single task of every single job in every single function. Now that's quite scary because it's suddenly making everything quite transparent. But what it does is it gets all the leaders on the same page, so we can have a dispassionate view about what the potential for the organization is. And we could decide then, although this area has enormous commercial potential to dramatically optimize how it works, it's very sensitive and we're not going to touch it. This area we could do more bold things, and these areas, let's leave them alone for now. So I say the first thing is to have that dispassionate, data-driven view of what is the potential. And if you don't have that, then it's all gut feeling and random activity. So if you're a rational leader of a company and you appreciate the transformative potential of AI on your company in the sector you're in, doing that first bit of work is, I would just say, mandatory. And now the beauty is it doesn't have to cost £10 million with McKinsey. You can do this by a press of a button. And that's what I've just described to you is very scary, because having that instant transparency suddenly, raises all kinds of, I'm seeing it already, raises all kinds of concerns when you show the data And
Yeah.
then you can then debate the data and discuss it and interpret it, but it's suddenly creating transparency, which companies are not really used to.
I think I'd like to finish with my final question, which is then thinking about maybe the reaction of the consumer to that. So, as you said earlier, we're almost geared to look at continued efficiency in organizations because that's what the market demands, that's what the shareholders demand. But of course, another key stakeholder is the consumer, and then thinking about how the consumer reacts to that balance between human and agent or AI in the way in which they're served products or services, no matter what it might be. So just to finish with some final thoughts about any views based yet on. I mean, is the consumer seeing this shift, or aren't we there yet? What
No,
might?
we're not there yet. No. So ultimately, this should be what we've just described about the organization serving its markets and its consumers much better. And the example of the protection gap was a good one. Those are non-consumers essentially, but it's bringing cost-effective solutions to them. So that should be a big tick in the box for everybody. Consumers happy, the providers happy, and the government's happy because it doesn't have to pick up the bill itself. So if an organization exists as you know who was it who said an organization exists to have a customer, then what we're talking about is helping the organization to be much more able to serve the unmet needs of the customer. Now, of course, interacting with the organization through a chatbot is a different thing, but and obviously needs to be appropriate and attractive and the experience good. And we're seeing that that's getting easier and easier to do, of course. But I think fundamentally it's about, if business is about getting and holding a customer, then it's about helping the organization to serve that customer better. And then that should be good for the consumer as well.
I guess the test of that will be to come back and have this conversation next year, Simon, and to understand kind of how that's flown through the well, both supply chain and directly to consumer and how they've reacted. It's been a pleasure to kind of look at your take on agentic AI. There are no answers for any of this, of course. It is emergent, but it's great fun to find a way of learning more and sharing more. And thank you for doing that.
Pleasure. Really good to speak to you, Rob.